Hello and welcome to Not Complain Enough. I'm your podcast host, Karista, and today we are on episode 17. This episode is going to take a slightly different twist. This is going to be a bit more personal today. So I know that I've gone through and provide anecdotals and all sorts of different things throughout sort of the series of this podcast, and we're introducing more interviews and things. But today I actually wanted to really delve into, I guess, my journey and, why I created this space, why I think it's important that we speak about these things. And I guess trigger warning, it's going to cover things like miscarriage and suicide, ideation and things like that. So if those things are triggering for you, please, tune out. And for those of you who are struggling, I see you. I really see you. So to begin, well, look, when we're looking at a work context, I mean, I started working quite young. I used work as an escape from a very emotionally and physically abusive household. And that helped to, help me to cope, really, was being out of that environment. Work was the safe space to go to that helped me escape. But as the years have gone on and the more work I've done on myself and the more things that I've gone through and experienced, the more I realized that work was not the safe haven that it had been through so many years. It actually became quite abusive in itself. And interestingly, like, I think when it comes to work and it comes to workplaces, sorry, dry mouth, going to take a sip of tea. That's better. When we come to work and we come to workplaces, it's like this, there are these places that people want to create these cultures that they don't want people to leave, and they want them to come in and spend all their time there and spend so much energy and time there. And, companies set that up purposely so that people kind of want to be there, but also don't want to leave, in a sense. And so what you see there is, what we've seen with Google and places like that, who kind of initially started a lot of this, these extra things, like pool tables and relaxation areas and things like that. Like, I remember being in Scotland, and the parliament there actually have like these little kind of meditation relaxation hubs. It's interesting architecture, let's put it that way. But what so many of these places do is they really try and create these spaces for people to go to that they don't really want to leave, so that they're just going to provide and do more work for them, which obviously works out for companies, right? Like, that's what they want, is they want people to work hard, they want more out of their employees, all of that sort of thing. But in my time of working crazy, I mean, at 21, I was working like 5 jobs to save to go overseas. And I was working in hospitality. And let's just say that, at that age, like, well, I would have been 20 because I got a one-way ticket with my boyfriend at the time, and we went straight to London. And that was like a week after, it was a week after the London bombings that happened. And it was also sort of, yeah, just after I turned 21. So it was a really interesting time. But in the lead up to that, like, I remember ending up at the doctors with these huge, like, heart palpitations, and, I had tight pains in my chest. I didn't know what was going on. And doctor was like, look, you're incredibly stressed. Like, you need to not be working so much. And for me, I was like, well, I can't do that. Like, they need me. I'm needed in all of these places. Like, I work really hard. Yeah, like, I can't take time off, and I'm saving and all this sort of thing. And I remember I was working at a restaurant and had to go to my next shift. So I was doing a nighttime, I was doing like this nighttime shift, and then I had to go to my next job, which was a graveyard shift at a club, which started at like 11 at night and finished at 4 in the morning. And I had just a fucking breakdown. I was overexhausted. I was entirely burnt out, like incredibly burnt out. And that was at a time where burnout wasn't really something that people acknowledged or knew about. And so I was incredibly burnt out. And back then I used to smoke because that's what you did in hospitality to get a break was you'd go out for a smoko. And I remember going out the back for a smoke and I just was in tears. I was inconsolable. Like I could not stop crying. And the head chef and actual owner of the restaurant was, he came out and he's like, "Oh my gosh, like you're right." And I was like, "No, I'm not coping." And he's like, "Look, just, go home, like go home and sleep and just, relax." And I'm like, "I can't, I've got to go to my next job." And he's like, "Listen, I will call up for you. Like you are not going, just go home and actually relax." And the stubborn person that I am, I was like, I'm fine, I'm fine. And I'm pretty sure I went to that next job. Um, but equally, like he was so kind in that he arranged an appointment, a massage with his massage therapist. And she was such a beautiful lady. And so I went and had this massage and I went to go pay her. And she's like, "No, it's already been fixed up." And I was like, "What?" And she's like, "No, he's already sorted it out." I'm like, "Oh my gosh." And, I just think those moments really matter. And in stark contrast to that, and this is where it's getting really personal. Um, in 2020, I was unexpectedly pregnant. I'd had a one night stand and I had no idea that I was pregnant. And prior to that, I'd been going through these really chronic health issues. So I had chronic fatigue unknowingly. That only came up in like blood tests that, they were like, "Oh, you've had chronic fatigue." I'm like, "No, I haven't." They're like, "Yeah, it's in your bloods." I'm like, "Well, I worked through that." So I'd worked through chronic fatigue. I was just working like crazy. And in 2015, I had gone on this like 6-week trip, went to a wedding in Istanbul, went and toured Italy, Switzerland, France, went to Ireland, like to visit people from when I used to live there. Um, I did this like massive trip and came back, started a new job, and everything was going great. Like it was all really good. You go have these like breaks and then you come back all relaxed and you're like, "Oh yeah, this is fine. This is amazing." Like, yeah. Anyway, lo and behold, like those kind of, those habits that you get into where you just kind of overwork are really easy to fall back into. And so, this person of me who, is incredibly hardworking, like that is one thing that I know how to do really fucking well, is to work really hard. And so when I came into this job and like I was working as the executive assistant to a CEO. So it was quite a hectic kind of role, really busy. Everyone wants a piece of you all the time. Like there's no off button. And I would spend my weekends literally just fucking sleeping. I couldn't do anything. I really didn't have any social life because I was working like crazy. And then um, in order to cope with the busyness of my job and like not really being able to talk to anyone about it either, because when you're in those positions, um, and they're incredibly lonely. I mean, as a CEO, those positions are incredibly lonely as well. But like as the executive assistant to a CEO, those positions are incredibly lonely because people generally only want to talk to you because you can do something for them and they want to get something out of you. Like they want, to put a good impression into the CEO and all the rest of it. So they usually use you in order to do that. Um, And so, you've kind of got to front all the time. Like, you can't be real with people, because when you do divulge information to people, they use that against you, or they use it as gossip or whatever. And so these are incredibly lonely positions. And like, you kind of take on a lot of that emotional and mental burden yourself. Um, and even doing things outside of that, like, I was really proactive in trying to, I'd been through chronic fatigue. I'd had massive bouts of burnout in my years. Like, I knew what that looked like, and I knew where that led to. And this was probably one of the worst that I actually got to, if I'm honest, because I got to a point where there was all these things that started going wrong. Like, you know, I had had depression in the past, but like, this didn't feel like depression. It felt different. And I was really proactive in looking to find people to help, and things to do. And, I'd tried therapy in the past, and that wasn't entirely helpful. I didn't really find a very good therapist. I tried a psychiatrist who, when I had worked with her in Canberra, she was really great. But also, I did get to the point where I ended up going on antidepressants, which it was something that I really didn't want to do, but I knew at the time I needed to do that. And I am thankful for those, because they did help me at the time. But equally, like, it was still a band-aid to so much of what was going on underneath. And so, um, like, in the lead up to this incident in 2020, all of this like health stuff was coming up, and I was going to doctor to doctor to doctor, and I had so many blood tests. It was actually incredible. Like, I was a pincushion, and I also joked that I'd be the worst junkie in the world, because they can never find a vein. Like, they can just never find a vein. So like, jokes aside, but yeah, it's, um, so in going through this process, in discovering what was really going on, I think part of that, I saw that, work was actually killing me. And it was killing me slowly. And, you know, the support that workplaces profess to have is just really not there. So much of the onus is put on the individual to be the one to speak up, to be the one to go fix themselves, to be the one to, you know, do all of the things. And I think that there's a level of incredible responsibility and blame shifting there that happens. And it makes you feel like you have like failed as a person because you can't sort your own shit out. And that's actually so fucking detrimental to people in that situation, because um yeah, I got to this point where I was like incredibly depressed. I was drinking quite a lot, as a way to cope. I was drinking because work was stressful, and that was the stress release. And that's what I'd grown up around too. Um, so, like, we're not really taught particular ways in order to decompress from these situations. And our society, like, reinforces that. I mean, particularly in Australia, there's a very big drinking culture. And, if you've had a bad day at work, it's like, oh, well, just have a glass of wine, it'll sort you out. And I think what we're seeing with that is that people aren't actually dealing with what's really going on underneath. And that's totally what had happened for me. Like, I wasn't dealing with it. I sought out so many different types of like modalities to help in those situations, meditation, Reiki, massage, energetics, all sorts of different things, you know, and all of them are useful in their own way. And I am grateful for that process that I went through, but I got incredibly frustrated because I was doing all of the things. I was doing everything that you possibly could to try and fix what the fuck was going on. And I think what we've gotten to, particularly in a lot of our workplaces and in a lot of the ways that practitioners work with people, is that not many of them are really trauma informed. Not many of them really know how to navigate things that are so complex. And in the process of like trying to find out what the hell was going on, I finally came like, it was actually really funny. I went to this like cacao ceremony in Bondi, and it was just a random thing. It was some chick on Instagram, and I was like, oh yeah, that looks fine. Like some full moon ceremony or something. And I went along, and I'd been going through all of these doctors. I was just in a really bad space. And I thought, something was telling me to go. And I sat down and we had to share, part of like what brought us there or what's going on for us and that sort of thing. And this woman that was sitting next to me who went, like, she was telling her story just before mine. I literally just started crying because I was just like, her story, exactly what she was saying, was everything I was going through. Everything. I had brain fog. I could not function. I was hardly eating, or when I was eating, I was feeling sick. Like, there was just so many things going on. My body was just like, I was so frustrated because cognitively I was totally there, and I knew that I knew how to do stuff, but like I just had this constant brain fog that just wouldn't leave, and I was constantly tired. Um, and exhausted, like beyond exhausted. I could hardly do anything. I mean, the thought of going for a walk was exhausting, let alone trying to do any sort of exercise. Anyway, this woman was telling her story, and I was just like, fuck, that's so familiar. And then she was like, yeah. And then I found this really great integrative doctor who has like done these tests with me, and we've figured out what's going on. And I was like, I need the name of that doctor. And I did. Like, that was like one of the, that's sort of perhaps the reason that I went along to that night. I don't know, but it definitely was a thing that helped to change and actually figure out what the fuck was going on for me. And so part of that process was actually realizing that I went to this integrative doctor who did the tests, and she specializes in what's known as CIRS, so chronic inflammatory response syndrome. And that actually is, well, it's sort of like, it's an autoimmune type thing. It's triggered from mold, essentially. So uh, there's two ways that, it's either something that's inherently like in you and that's just the way you're made up, or it's an environmental thing. Most generally, it's an environmental type of thing. And so, yeah, like the place that I had been living in was very dark and dingy, although I was at work most of the time. So it was good for a weekend of sleeping. Um, and yeah, I went to this integrative doctor who figured out that I had CIRS. Um, so I went through the process of, different binders and different, um, like different vitamins and things like that to try and just get any sort of energy back. Because that was the thing, like, even though I was going through the motions of doing my job and everything like that, like, I wasn't really. I was doing it, but I wasn't doing things particularly well because I was so incredibly sick. And in this process, like, in the lead up to even finding this integrative doctor, I mean, I was having brain scans and all different sorts of things, like thinking that there was some sort of cancer, or, it was definitely a process. And those processes that you go through, to try and, I guess, pathologize what's happening for you is emotionally so exhausting. And I think that we don't really acknowledge that enough, like, particularly when you don't know. And I think that that's part of the more frustrating thing. Like, I went through, it would have been a good couple of years of like not really knowing what was going on. And when I did finally figure out what was going on, like when I did finally get this doctor and everything like that, it was a relief to be able to know what to actively do. But in amongst all of that, I was dealing with, um, before I figured out that that's what was going on, like in the lead up to that, I was working to this CEO. I had a family member go through a divorce for the second time and ended up living with me, um, in my one-bedroom apartment while I was working to a very demanding, well, in a very demanding role, and to a quite demanding person. And I like, my body just shut down. I got to a point where I literally spent 2 weeks asleep in bed and I didn't move. Um, and I was beyond tired. Like, there's just, when I think back, yeah, like, it's incomprehensible just how tired you can be. And so I was beyond tired. I spent like 2 weeks in bed. Um, And after that incident, I went back to my workplace and sat down with that CEO and said, look, I can't do this anymore. I'm no good to you. I'm no good to myself. I'm trying to figure out what's going on with my body. Like, nothing wants to work anymore. And so anyway, I moved into a different role. And she was incredibly supportive of helping me move into a different role. Um, and so I did that. And for the first part of that, it was fine. Like, it was slightly less demanding, but also equally as busy. Like, I managed to find myself in these incredibly busy roles. Um, but actually, what ended up happening was I was incredibly bullied in that role. Um, like, incredibly bullied. And I mean, I'd been bullied in the past, but not to this extent, not to the man- malicious and insidious way that this bullying was happening. Um, and that was, I mean, coupled with the health stuff that I was going through, that was incredibly hard. And I was in a very, very dark place. I became incredibly suicidal. I was deeply, deeply depressed. It was like, it was worse, I think, because the support that I did have, even though it was limited, had gone from a little bit to basically none at all. And that was harder because I had people that were actively trying to get rid of me. They were actively trying to undermine what I was doing. And yet they would steal what I had, the ideas that I'd come up with and use them as their own, and then turn around and say that I wasn't doing anything. Um, I ended up kind of, befriending. Well, one of my other colleagues was doing a lot of event stuff. So I would actually help them do what they needed to do because the area that I was in was just so incredibly toxic. And it was all women. And I've spoken before about how women are just incredibly cruel. And I came across some of the cruelest women you probably could ever wish upon anyone. And it was literally a witch hunt in a lot of ways. Like, they just did not like me, and that was fine. But also, they were just incredibly awful about it. And so, um, because of the health things, I had to take time off. I was getting lots of tests, and I was trying to get myself back together. And in doing that, the support was just non-existent. Um, and in actual fact, part of that process, I think, actually showed me was, you know, even when you're in a bad place, there's so many people that don't actually want to see you get better. They don't actually want to support you. And they will do anything in their power to actually undermine that process for you as well. And so I think that, coming back to this, like, disconnect between support and putting the onus back on the individual, like, I was doing everything that I could within my power and within the energetic levels that I had at the time to get myself back together. I was doing everything. And yet the environment that I was in and the people that I was around were making that worse, and they were making that journey incredibly hard. So yeah, I was incredibly sick. I got the diagnosis, and then that really helped to, at least I knew what I was working with, and I was working with an integrative doctor who was able to really help me through that process, which was an absolute godsend. But the biggest thing that I had to do as well was move out of the place that I was living in, because that was causing me illness. And it took me about 6 weeks to try and find somewhere to move to. But also I was like, I was so, so tired, like beyond tired. And I mean, I guess the only thing that I can equate it to is like when you're pregnant and you're just incredibly tired, like you go through bouts of that. But that was like me every single day. Like even just to get up and have a shower and go to work was incredibly exhausting. So on top of that, spend my weekends looking for somewhere to live, it was exhausting, beyond exhausting. And so I finally moved. And then, yeah, in 2020, obviously in Australia, it would have been March, we went into lockdown. And because I'd worked for a federal government organization, we were like one of the last people standing. Like they didn't want to, they wanted to set the example that, everything's fine. Well, in hindsight, we know that that's a different thing. But yeah, in 2020, so we went into lockdown. I was baking cupcakes like there was no tomorrow, like everyone was baking banana bread, and I was craving gluten-free vanilla cupcakes like they were going out of fashion. And I was putting on a little bit of weight, like weren't we all? And so is part of the treatment of what I was doing. I was seeing my chiropractor each week, and I remember, well, on this particular day, I got an Uber over to my chiropractor, and I was on the bed and I was having these incredible pains, like absolute incredible pain. And I was like, oh, maybe it's just a really bad period. And anyway, as I was leaving there, I was in so much pain, and I walked up to the shop, went to the supermarket, called an Uber, did a meeting in the Uber on the way home, had another meeting that I needed to attend. And then I was bleeding a lot, and I was like, this is actually really strange. Like this is not normal. Anyway, I was like one of those, for those of you in Australia, there was a, I don't know if it's still around, but there used to be a magazine called Dolly, which was like a teen girls magazine. And, they'd write in stories um, about, yeah, just like coming of age, you know, what to do when you see this and blah, blah, blah. But also, uh, they used to do things like, I went to the toilet and a baby popped out. And that was what I thought of when it was happening, because I was like, I've literally turned into one of those Dolly Doctor stories. So yeah, I miscarried at home. I was 18 weeks pregnant, and it was a shock. And because I'd been through all this health stuff previously, like the normal signs that you would think of with pregnancy, just I didn't think anything of them. Like I always felt nauseous. I was feeling nauseous for like 2 years because that's what was going on for my body. So yeah, like all the signs that you'd normally equate to pregnancy, I didn't even think of. Like it just didn't occur to me that I was pregnant, because I'd also taken the morning after pill. So I had actively tried to not get pregnant. And for those playing along at home, if you're using the morning after pill, please be careful because it doesn't always work. Case in point, right here. But yeah, I was 18 weeks pregnant, went to the hospital. Of course, two blokes turn up, like the ambulance, two blokes, which is always fun when you're like naked in the shower, the baby. Uh, so yeah, I went to the hospital and had surgery. Um, the really like I think the thing about these processes and when these experiences happen, there's definitely a lot to be said for the people that work in hospitals and the people that are there for support. So I had an incredible social worker that came to visit me, and you know it was really interesting because so for those of you that don't know, and most people probably don't, because I had no idea until I went through this, and then you obviously read all about stuff. But I think it's at 20 weeks, it's considered a stillbirth, and so if I had have been even a couple of weeks along more than what I had been, I would have had to go through an entire like service, like a funeral service. And when I spoke to the social worker, like, she kind of they offer you a care package of like a teddy bear and things like that. And she's like, would you like that? And I was like, no, I'm fine. I think in that stage I was in so much shock still that I I really didn't know what was going on. I mean, even in the ambulance on the way to the hospital, I was in the WhatsApp group texting my team being like, "Oh, by the way, I'm probably not going to be in tomorrow because something's happened and I'm just on my way to hospital, but it's not COVID." Um, so yeah, like I turned up to the hospital and it was literally like being a rock star because everything was in lockdown, so there was hardly anyone in there. So I had the whole emergency ward to myself, basically. Um, and yeah, like, I think there's something to be said about the support and the people that are around you, like, in those circumstances. And, our health professionals see so much of this and they deal with this every day. And just the trauma of, you know, viscerally experiencing that with those people is huge. Even when I was like, because I was actually quite calm and collected when I turned off, surprisingly. I think in many years of dealing with quite awful situations, I think I'm really good in a crisis. I'm great in a crisis. When everyone's freaking out, I'm like the cool, calm, collected one, just being like, yeah, we do this. And so, yeah, when I got into the emergency ward and everything, like one of the nurses turned to me and she was just like, wow, see that doctor over there? He's like incredibly impressed with you. And it takes a lot to impress him. And I'm like, well, that's what I'm here for, just to impress people. Um, but, jokes aside, it was incredibly hard and it was shocking. And I think the worst part about all of that, actually, though, was not going through it. It was the aftermath of it. And so, the social worker was talking to me about like, well, actually, what had happened was I was told that I needed to have an autopsy. And I was sort of like, oh, okay, like I guess. And it wasn't until the social worker came to speak to me and she was like, you don't actually have to do that. And I was like, oh, well, if I don't have to, then I'm not going to because I didn't know I was pregnant. So, I was doing like lockdown birthday parties and drinking and things like that because I had no idea. I mean, I was incredibly sick after drinking. So that should have been a sign, but it really wasn't because I was like, oh, maybe my body just doesn't like alcohol anymore. Um, anyway, so yeah, like I was kind of, I think those people around you that help to give you perspective of what's going on help to give you your agency back and they help you to make decisions in that time when it's incredibly hard too. I mean, so much of it is pressured, like you're kind of pressured into making decisions in the moment. And it's a hard thing to do when you're still, your body has gone through this incredibly huge thing. And then you're also in the aftermath aftermath of shock. Like, you're in so much shock that you don't actually know what's going on. And yeah, like it's one of those experiences that, you know, it's the after it's what happens afterwards that really changes who you are, I think, as a person. Like, and you can't go back. Like, when you've gone through those sorts of experiences, there's no going back. And the reason that I talk about this and the reason that I'm even doing this episode is because when the things that happened to me happened and I spoke up about it, it helped people to open up about their experiences. And so, you know, this is not a woe is me story or anything like that at all. This is literally to show people that they are not alone in what they go through and that these things happen. And I think so in terms of like what happens afterwards, um, not only was the social worker incredibly helpful, you know, and then you obviously I took some time off, and I ended up like, yeah, going back to my doctor and taking a little bit more time off because I was like, oh yeah, fine, 2 weeks, I'll be fine. But I needed a little bit longer because it was quite an experience to go through, and particularly going through that alone. I think that when you go through miscarriage, a lot of people obviously are in partnerships, and that's incredibly hard as well. And I'm not discounting that in the slightest because, you know, both of you go through that. And even in my situation, like, you know, 6 months after the fact, I actually called the guy and said, you know, look, I don't want anything from you or anything, but I just want to let you know that this happened. And FYI, we both dodged a bullet here. We could have had a child. But you know, I mean, I'm being facetious there, but like, yeah, it's kind of, you know, I think sometimes in these incredibly hard situations, you do joke about things to deflect some of that pain, and to sort of lighten the situation, but it is incredibly difficult. And I think that it's something that's not spoken about enough. And so I guess part of my story that I do really want to share is that when I did go back to work, and well, I mean, we're all working from home. So when I did sign back into work, and I'd been very open and honest to my manager throughout that whole entire time that I was off. I told them exactly what I was going through. And I did ask them to not share that too widely because I was still processing that experience. Um, and look, whether that was honored or not, I don't know. Uh, but, you know, it is what it is. And so when I did log in to work, when I got back to work, and I was ready to, you know, kind of integrate back into a workplace, I had a meeting with my manager that morning, and they, you know, like gave me an update, gave me tasks to do. And then I had the team meeting that we were having every day. Um, and, you know, nothing was said. Everything seemed normal. Everything was fine. Like, it was just like going back into work. Um, and sort of towards the end of this meeting, like the head person says to me, oh, you know, I need to speak to you. Can we have a meeting this afternoon? I was like, yeah, sure, fine. Anyway, in that meeting that I had, I was told that I was no longer part of the team, that I'd been moved in a restructure, and that yeah, it was effective immediately. And I mean, yeah, like, I just think in these circumstances, how you get treated and how your workplace treats you when you go through some pretty life-changing, pretty fucking awful things really speaks volumes of the people in that organization, and it speaks volumes of that organization as a whole. So, yeah, I was told effective immediately. HR called me. I was like, look, I've been off because I had a miscarriage. Like, it's not like I've just been chucking a sickie or something. Like, I've been through a lot. And their response was, yeah, sorry about that, but you've been reassigned. I'm like, right. And I knew in that moment that I was not going to get any compassion, and HR was not there to help me. And I think that that's the other thing. Like, we need to stop defaulting to HR being the help people, because they actually are not in so many ways. Like, that's why people are not, they don't go to HR, because they're not actually helpful, because they are all about protecting the company as opposed to really meaningfully giving a shit about staff. So, word of warning, but also something to think about. And yeah, and then the team leader of the place that I was meant to be, of the area that I was meant to be moving to, she called me and I told her what I was going through. And I was like, look, this is all a shock to me. I've just been through a really shocking experience. And this is, yeah, like, this is actually fucking awful, to do this. Like, this is not okay. Um, yeah, like, I just felt so alone, unsupported, like I had no voice and I had no opportunity to even have a discussion about anything, to even like try and have a trajectory of my own career. Um, and yeah, like, I just think that these sorts of places, there's really no way to hold that kind of behavior even accountable. I mean, even in my circumstances, so I had previously worked for the CEO, and I tried to figure out how this had happened. Like, I went into the new area and, was doing really well and like making an effort and just trying to put things behind me. But, there's certain things that you can't just like suck up and move on. And this was one of them. And so, yeah, like, I, you know, I complained to the head of HR. I met with him. He actually said things to me that should not have been shared. He divulged information about other staff members, about what they were going through, like personal details that should never be shared. Um, and when those things happen, it makes you wonder, like, what else gets shared and how much of your situation is just like gossip and fodder for everyday chat, Uh, so yeah, I met with him. That was fruitless. I said, look, I don't actually want to hear the talking points. Like, I actually just want the truth. Like, I know that you guys write talking points for these situations and what managers need to say so that everyone stays on, like towing the party line. But I want to know who made that decision. Like, when was that made? How was that decision made? And why was I moved into this area that I have absolutely no experience in? And yeah, I could not get an answer. I met with the deputy CEO, or the acting deputy CEO, who like was pretending like it was her, because she like wouldn't give an answer. Like, there was just no straight answer. No one could give me an honest answer. No one could give me the truth. And I think the thing that frustrates people so much is when you've seen from the other side. Like, I worked to the CEO. I've seen how these people operate both sides, like from the lowly worker person to the upper echelons of the executive. Like, I see how they work. And so me calling it out and being like, I know that you've got talking points that you're just saying, and I don't want to hear those. I want to hear the truth. And surely that's not too hard. And they just couldn't do it. Uh, Actually, the meeting that I had with the deputy CEO, and HR, like, there was some interactions prior to that, and I ended up calling the CEO and telling them what was going on. And they were shocked, and they had been blamed for like the decision, um, saying that they had made the decision. And so I flat out asked them straight away. I was like, look, I don't normally do this, and I don't, I don't use my access to people, for my own worth, like for my own gain, like so many people do. I just don't operate like that. Like, I'm not this whole tit for tat thing and what you can do for me. Like, I don't care. I treat everyone as they are, right? from the CEO to the cleaner. And I think that that's a testament of people, is how they treat people that cannot do anything for them. But anyway, I spoke to them and they apologized profusely, but also told me that they did not make that decision. And so I could not get anyone to actually own the decision or how it was made. Yeah. And I just think that, like, sharing these things, it's not, and this is not a blame, like a naming and blaming, kind of exercise either. Like, because I don't think that that's necessarily helpful, because there's so many organizations that are actually just fucking awful. And so you can sit here and say, oh, this place is awful and this place is awful. But what we need to do is actually, in these circumstances, actually take a cold, hard fucking look at yourself and think about the organization that you intentionally want to have, the organization that you intentionally want to create, the environment that you intentionally want to have. Like, this is not just one incident. And I mean, it was pretty horrific, like obviously not a great time. But equally, like, I was talking to colleagues around this same place who were, not coping, like they were mentally not well because of the way that they were treated in this organization. And, this comes back to, like, putting the onus back on the individual is not, though, like, is not the fucking answer. Organizations need to stand up and actually be held accountable for the way that they treat people and for the way that they do things. I mean, and I did look at doing that, because obviously, being a public service organization, there's some other remit that they need to go through. But I wasn't ready at the time. I was still processing, this situation. Like, I was highly emotional because I was alone. There was no help. There was no support. Turning around and telling someone that, oh, you just need to go see the EAP, fuck off. How is that going to help? I was already seeing a therapist. And my therapist actually, you know, pointed out just how awful the workplace was, that actually I was coping better with the situation that I'd been in. And it was actually the workplace that was more, soul destroying and detrimental to my own mental well-being than the than have than enduring a miscarriage on my own. Um and yeah, like, I just think we need to share our stories a lot more, but obviously when it's safe to do so. And I feel like I can share this now because I've been out of it for a little while. And you know, I don't intend to go back into government work, because in my experiences, it's the least supportive. I think it depends on your team, like, and like your immediate team is fine, that's okay. But still, like, you still have to deal with these types of executives that are quite happy to not take any responsibility and blame shift constantly. I mean, we're seeing it play out through this robo-debt inquiry, which is awful. Like, it's beyond awful. And it highlights how so many of these organizations actually work. And it highlights just how out of touch with society they are, how out of touch they are with the ramifications of their actions. And that's the thing that, really needs to be taken a cold, hard look at, is the ramifications of actions. And so, yeah, I hope that in sharing some of my story, it helps you to realize where, maybe parts of your life aren't being as supportive as they could be. And perhaps you're doing everything that you can personally, but it's actually the environment that you're in that is impeding that healing journey for you. So this has been probably a bit more of a rambly episode, but I was interviewed not that long ago about my experience, and I realized that it is something that I do want to share and talk about a lot more. because the more we're able to share these experiences, the more we're able to not feel so alone in them. And so, even if you don't reach out, and just, yeah, listen and take it in and realize that these things happen and that they're fucking awful. And we do need to talk about them a lot more because it's not okay. And I think we get, you know, kind of pushed into this silence that we don't deserve to be in. And also, miscarriage is a club that no one wants to join. We don't actively choose to be part of it. We don't actively, want to feel that way, that our body that there's something wrong, that we weren't able to, like bring a life to full term. It's incredibly challenging. And so, yeah, I just hope that this helps people to not feel as alone. And if you do or would like support, please reach out. I do love getting in touch with you all and, yeah, and listening to where you're at too. So, as always, thank you so much for listening. And you can follow, subscribe. You can find me on LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, all the different things. I'm probably not great at being consistent on a lot of them, but we're trying. So, anyway, thanks so much for listening, and I hope you have a fabulous week.